It wasn't an explosion that shook the American government in 1971. Not a bomb, not a battle, just paper. 7,000 pages of truth, classified, copied, and released. And with them, the illusion of trust unraveled. The Vietnam War was never just about Vietnam. It was about credibility, power, control. The Pentagon Papers, commissioned in 1967, were meant for internal eyes only. They revealed lies from 4 administrations, spanning decades. Thousands died while leaders concealed the truth and planned for more. Then one man decided the American people deserved to know. Daniel Ellsberg was a Marine, a scholar, and a supporter of the Vietnam War. By the mid-1960s, he was working at the Rand Corporation, a defense research institution closely advising the Pentagon on military strategy. At Rand, Ellsberg studied the Vietnam conflict from the inside, alongside other defense analysts, including Anthony Russo. Russo, like Ellsberg, had once believed in the mission.
If we allow South Vietnam to fall, the regional consequences will be significant. Thailand, Laos, Cambodia. The balance shifts.
He had traveled to Vietnam, seen the war up close, and for years he believed American involvement was justified. But years of research and field reports had begun to erode that certainty.
Territory secured. That's what they're calling it.
That's what Saigon's reporting.
And 2 pages later, area abandoned within 48 hours.
That's tactical repositioning.
Is it? We keep redefining failure, so it sounds like progress.
Every war looks worse in the data than it does in the briefing room.
No. This one looks worse in the briefing room, too.
If they know it's not working, why escalate?
That's the question.
Strategies sold as successes were lies.
Progress is being made.
Victories reported as cover for failure. By 1969, both men had seen enough. But seeing the truth was not the same as exposing it.
You've been staying late.
If the public knew what was in here, the war wouldn't last another year.
You're talking about leaking it.
I'm talking about ending it.
That's prison.
Probably.
How many pages?
7,000.
Then we better start.
The study itself had been commissioned in 1967 by Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. It was a classified internal history, a 7,000-page report tracing how 4 administrations had expanded the war. As a Rand analyst with high-level security clearance, Ellsberg was granted access to the study. The documents were not stolen in a dramatic break-in. They were entrusted to him as part of his work. What he found inside was not military intelligence about the enemy. It was a record of deception by his own government. In September 1969, Ellsberg began removing volumes of the Pentagon study from Rand. He had authorized access to the study, but the volumes were not meant to leave secure custody. At home, or later in borrowed offices after dark, he began copying them in secret. He did not do it alone. Anthony Russo joined him early in the process. They worked together in Los Angeles, often at night. The copying took place in Russo's girlfriend's advertising office, one of the few places where they could access a Xerox machine without drawing suspicion. They alternated feeding pages into the copier. They took turns trimming top-secret labels from the covers. They organized and rebound the pages after copying. The process took months, not days. 7,000 pages meant lifting the copier lid thousands of times. Early Xerox machines overheated. They jammed. They had to work cautiously, aware that discovery could mean decades in prison. By the end of 1969, they had copied thousands of pages. The truth was no longer confined to a government vault. But copying the truth was only the beginning. Ellsberg believed there was still a lawful path forward. Under the Constitution's speech or debate clause, members of Congress were protected for statements made in official proceedings. If a senator entered the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record, the documents could become public, legally.
You're sure about this?
It's the cleanest way.
And if they refuse?
Then we'll know.
The risk is shared, even if the meeting isn't. In November 1969, Ellsberg carried 2 briefcases to Capitol Hill, eager to speak to Senator Fulbright.
Senator, this study shows the public was misled about the war's scope and objectives.
You're certain this contradicts sworn testimony?
Yes, sir.
If I release this, it would detonate in Washington.
That may be necessary.
I'll review it.
Did he say yes?
He said he'd review it.
That's not the same thing.
No, it's not.
If they sit on it, we're still exposed.
I know.
Ellsberg approached multiple lawmakers who had publicly criticized the war.
This would provoke the White House.
The truth should.
We have to be careful.
Careful meant delay. In April 1970, President Richard Nixon authorized U.S. and South Vietnamese troops to invade eastern Cambodia. At Kent State University in Ohio, students protested the expansion of the war. Then in less than 13 seconds, 4 students lost their lives. 9 others were wounded. For many Americans, the war had crossed from distant jungle battlefields into their own campuses. For Ellsberg, it confirmed what the documents had already revealed. The war was not winding down. It was widening.
So that's it?
They won't do it.
Then what?
The system he had trusted would not act. If Congress would not confront the truth, the press would have to. By early 1971, after more than a year of waiting on Congress, Ellsberg knew he needed a journalist who understood the war. He called Neil Sheehan. Daniel Ellsberg and Neil Sheehan were not strangers. Years earlier, during the war itself, both men had worked in Vietnam.
Are we securing these areas or just passing through them?
That depends on how long we stay.
Sheehan respected Ellsberg's access. Ellsberg respected Sheehan's skepticism. However, Ellsberg did not give Sheehan the documents immediately.
What was so important that you had me rush over at this time? This is internal.
Yes.
This isn't analysis, it's admission.
For days, Sheehan read under Ellsberg's supervision. Once convinced of their authenticity and significance, Sheehan ensured the Times secured its own copy. The story was no longer just in the hands of the government. After securing its own copy, the leadership of the New York Times began to understand the magnitude of what they possessed. This was not a single leaked memo. It was a 7,000-page classified history, a record spanning 4 presidential administrations. It was evidence of systemic deception, and publishing it would challenge the authority of the presidency itself. To prevent discovery, the Times relocated the project to the New York Hilton. Several reporters and editors checked into a suite under strict secrecy. Phones were unplugged. Doors were double-locked. No one outside the team was told what was happening inside. The task was immense, 7,000 pages. The team divided the study into sections, assigning reporters to different administrations. Each claim was checked, each timeline verified. The responsibility now rested with the publisher of the New York Times, Arthur Ochs Sulzberger. Lawyers warned that publishing classified material could trigger prosecution under the Espionage Act. No American newspaper had ever faced a federal injunction to prevent publication in advance. If the government sought prior restraint, the Times could be shut down while the courts decided. The question was no longer whether the documents were authentic. It was whether the public had a right to read them. On June 13, 1971, the first installment of the Pentagon Papers reached the public. What had lived in classified vaults for years now sat on kitchen tables. The documents revealed that successive administrations had expanded the war while publicly minimizing its scope. They showed that Congress had not been fully informed, and that public optimism often masked private uncertainty. For some Americans, the papers confirmed long-held suspicions. For others, they were reckless, even dangerous.
The American people have been lied to consistently for years. This is unacceptable.
The documents did not directly implicate President Richard Nixon, but they threatened something larger, presidential authority. Within days, the Justice Department sought a court order to stop publication. For the first time in American history, the government sought prior restraint against a major newspaper.
Look here. This is the critical section right here.
Yes, I understand the risks, but we have to publish.
The attempt to silence the story only amplified it. As more newspapers joined in publishing the Pentagon Papers, the White House shifted its focus. If the documents could not be stopped, the source would be. Ellsberg knew the trail would eventually lead back to him. For months, he had accepted that prison was a possibility. If he remained anonymous, the legal fight would center on the press. If he stepped forward, it would center on him. On June 28, 1971, Daniel Ellsberg made his decision. He had revealed himself as the source of the leak and now faced indictment under the Espionage Act. The story was no longer only about what the government had done, it was about what would be done to Ellsberg. 17 days after the first article appeared, the question reached the highest court in the land. Can the government prevent a newspaper from publishing classified information? The government argued that publication posed a threat to national security. They claimed that disclosure could endanger lives, undermine diplomacy, and weaken the war effort. The newspapers argued that prior restraint, stopping publication before it occurs, violated the First Amendment.
Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press.
On June 30th, 1971, the Supreme Court issued its decision, 6-3.
The Supreme Court has ruled in favor of the newspapers this afternoon.
The court ruled that the government had not met the heavy burden required to justify prior restraint. The New York Times resumed publication. It was a landmark victory for press freedom, but it was not a victory for Daniel Ellsberg. On June 28, 1971, Daniel Ellsberg was indicted under the Espionage Act of 1917. Anthony Russo was indicted alongside him. The charges carried a possible sentence of 115 years in prison. The government argued that Ellsberg had unlawfully retained and transmitted classified information. The defense argued that Ellsberg and Russo acted in the public interest. But during the trial, another story emerged. Months earlier, members of the White House plumbers had broken into the office of Ellsberg's psychiatrist. They were searching for information to discredit him. The government had also authorized illegal wiretaps. In May 1973, Judge William Byrne dismissed all charges, citing government misconduct. The case collapsed. Daniel Ellsberg had faced the full weight of the United States government.